Hi, this is Paul. Last night, my wife actually woke me up because I was snoring, and she was frustrated enough that she woke me up enough that I decided to get up and let her fall back to sleep without the anxiety of me snoring, and was able to actually put together a bunch of thoughts that I was working on tomorrow afternoon. I actually tried to make a video, and I didn't actually delete the files, so I might put them at the end of this video. They'll probably be far longer than the rest of this video. Some of you might find it interesting. We'll see. But I woke up in the middle of the night and started responding to some stuff on Twitter. And it's really dangerous waking up in the middle of the night and writing on Twitter, because this morning I woke up and I thought, was I fully awake when I was writing this stuff? I'm not sure. Anyway, I started writing on Twitter, and very quickly I realized that this was something that I would want to put on my Substack. And so that is the origin of meaning making as first personal appropriation of the third personal. And so what sort of developed last night was a little bit more language to try to get to understanding Jonathan Pageau and what's going on in this little corner of the internet, and get some more language for it. And so the subtitle of this Substack is, "Why is Jonathan Pageau so hard to understand for many?" Now, some of you know that I have this Substack, and what I use this Substack for is usually to do video summaries or accumulate a bunch of things that I'm sort of disciplining myself using the structure of Twitter to write. And so if you're not subscribed to my Substack, subscribe. It's free. I don't know if I'll monetize it at some point, but I'm not monetizing yet. All of my posts on it are free. You will get a message in your inbox about it. I usually post them on Twitter. If you're not on Twitter, you probably have email and you can get it there. Usually I write a Substack after I do a video, and in this case, I wrote a Substack after I did a video that I didn't publish. So a lot of this is to get an idea about, okay, what are we really doing here? Because a lot of human life is acting and behaving and talking before you really know what you're doing or what you're thinking or what's going on. And so the more I listen to Pageau, especially, when I listened to his take on the book of Genesis that he posted on Jordan Peterson, that Jordan Peterson posted as sort of an interesting addendum to his biblical series. Why is Jonathan Pageau's take on the book of Genesis so different? And probably the best way to come to terms with it is that Jonathan Pageau is approaching the world from the first person. Now, I'm going to have to put on my headphones now. Some of you might also know that I have an on-again, off-again clips channel, and my reason for this channel continues to evolve. The channel's name is Vanderclips, and the link to this video and to the link to the channel is always in my notes below, but the links to this video would be in my notes below. This is just a little segment that I clipped from the Four Horsemen video. I've been playing around with reaping. That's Grim Grizz's term for, well, you can ask Grim Grizz exactly how he's using the term. My appropriation of Grim Grizz's term is grabbing these little tidbits from the internet, so I'm throwing them on my Vanderclips channel. I'm also trying to get little 2-minute videos that sometimes I'll post in my Twitter feed. I'm playing with that in terms of posting videos straight onto Twitter. I've been off of Facebook for a while now, over a year, and I know some of you have continued to, my volume is way down low. Here, that's better. Sorry, you don't have to mess with your volume again during this video. Some of you have written me on Facebook Messenger, and I haven't gotten back to you because I haven't looked at it for a year, but now I've been posting stuff that we're cleaning out in the church on Facebook Marketplace and thinking maybe I should clean up my Facebook account. Delete a whole bunch of past stuff like personal pictures and things that are in my Facebook account, and then maybe use my Facebook account more for work, because that's how I'm sort of using it now. Anyway, so here's a little clip of Jonathan Pageau making a point in the Four Horsemen video responding to John Verveiki.
The image that you use, which is the idea that we project meaning on an objective world. Already you can see the alienation that is bound up in that very proposition, which is, okay, so where are we then? We're not in the world. We're like these kind of ghosts that are floating above reality.
Now, if you watch Jonathan Pageau's talk with Rationality Rules and Adam Friend did, both of those conversations are prime examples of Jonathan trying to articulate the fact that he sees the world through the first personal instead of what is now the public convention, which is seeing the world through the third personal. Okay? So the first personal is seeing the world as we see it, going chronologically through time from a first-person perspective. And as Jonathan Pageau always says, the world lays itself out. Okay? And that's in many ways a lot of what his project has been, is being an apologist for the first personal, let's call it.
You use, which is the idea that we project meaning on an objective world. Already you can see the alienation that is bound up in that very proposition, which is, okay, so where are we then? We're not in the world. We're like these kind of ghosts that are floating above reality. Like
ghosts that are floating above reality. That is exactly what I've been talking about for 4 years in terms of a monarchical vision. Mono, which is one. Monarchical, which is highest vision, the one highest vision, which is exactly what science tries to do. And as Jordan Peterson talked about in the transliminal videos, we sort of depersonalize the world in order to gain this view. It's sort of like Woden losing an eye so he can have knowledge. That's the monarchical vision. That is the third personal. And what the public convention has been since the Enlightenment has been the third personal. Because the first personal was seen, it was part of, Verveiki nicely talks about this in terms of, I'll see, now I have to go back to the other clip that I made. Now I'm using some software that isn't really nicely recording the audio. I'll continue to work on that, but it saves me from downloading the file and going through that. I'm always looking for more efficient ways to reap, more efficient ways to take what I'm looking for. So here's this other video.
Related issues around ideas of levels of being, which is, I think you're right. All of you have said this, and this is, central to the phenomenology of intelligibility, but it seems to be, contradicted by something that, starts with Scotus and goes through Occam and goes into the heart of the scientific revolution. Is there's no such
and so you can see the journey towards this, of course, actually starts, as Vervaeke is right, before the scientific revolution, before the Protestant Reformation. Scotus and Occam and nominalism, and that's been pointed out by many, many people before this little corner of the internet.
Thing as levels. This is not the reality just is, existence isn't a predicate, and those kinds of things. Now, I'm not mentioning these things to espouse them. I'm mentioning them to try and indicate there have been very profound philosophical historical developments that have challenged this phenomenology, and that part of
now phenomenology too is in many ways sort of a first personal approach to philosophy, and that's part of the reason phenomenology got going, because it got to the point that the person was lost, and people, to what degree people were conscious of that, but the attempt to try to reintegrate the subject back into philosophy. Again, that's pretty esoteric, which is why I'm liking first personal and third personal as ways of sort of scaling this thing down in a way that I think many, many more people can appropriate it, because most people have an understanding of first person grammar and third person grammar. And in some ways, that's also a nice, really shorthand map of the division of the 4 Ps within Vervaeke's system of third person as propositional and first person as the participatory and the procedural and the perspectival. There's the third one.
The task, I don't want to be presumptuous. Part of what I see my task of being is to try and take the very best of science and answer all of those challenges in a way that restores confidence in the hierarchies of intelligibility and the phenomenology of connectedness.
Okay, now that all sounds, for most of you, that's just like whoosh, way over your head. Well, what is Vervaeke trying to do? In many ways, he's trying to do sort of what the IDW tried to do in terms of the social culture war thing and their own little scientific disciplines that they felt in the university, that with the recession of modernity, that science was getting eaten away. Vervaeke does fit into that group, but he's looking at the culture war stuff and saying more heat than light. He's got opinions. Every now and then you can pry one out of him, but for the most part, he's avoiding that because he's saying these things are manifestation of a much deeper thing. And Vervaeke says, I'd rather address the far deeper thing here than get lost in the distraction of all of this stuff. I mentioned, I did a bunch of writing on Twitter this morning. Jordan Peterson's status rocket ride cost him his career as a university professor. It cost him his career as a clinical psychologist. Vervaeke, I think, wisely is sort of sidestepping the status rocket, even though he's having a nice little status staircase that he's working on, which I think is very appropriate and is actually a far better, humanly speaking, a far better way of pursuing an agenda and getting a message out there, a status staircase instead of a status rocket. Because you can actually hold your life together and, you're not going to get altitude sickness. So this is what Vervaeke is working on, a bunch of this really wonky, thinky stuff.
Now, that's one thing I'd want to say.
But what the Pythagorean...
Now, on this particular clip that I just posted on my Vanderclips channel, Vervaeke's been talking a lot about Neoplatonism, and so I thought, I want to do a little bit more background. I want to find some more stuff on YouTube about Neoplatonism. And these Arthur Holmes videos that Wheaton has put up, and they've been up for years. He's really a fun lecturer. He's really an excellent lecturer. So these are also, when I think about sources, these are also things that evangelical Christians aren't necessarily going to be all scared about. Oh, this is coming from Harvard. Oh, this is coming from University of Toronto. Okay, this is coming from Wheaton. Okay? And this is coming from Wheaton from, they took videotape of this guy in maybe the 1980s or something. So, everybody can sort of settle down and not be too worried that some cabal of progressives or academicians are going to hoodwink them. This is Arthur Holmes just basically walking through the ideas of the great chain of being. Now, I'm not going to play this here. I intended this to be short because I have a 12:30 lunch appointment, and so this is going to force me to keep this short. It's already longer than I thought it was going to be, because what I really wanted to talk about was what I wrote on the Substack, which I am actually just sort of winding up, just reiterating, which is the reason that I can never write anything, because I'm perpetually rewriting what I intend to do as I go and then never getting to a final draft. Anyway, so Pageau, in a sense, stands on the shoulders of sort of the rising at the peak of modernity, the recession of modernity, the crisis of the subject, and his entire approach is the first personal. And so the first personal is the way that he approaches the book of Genesis. And in many ways, Peterson is not as far into this as Pageau is. What made Peterson's biblical series, his Genesis series, so powerful was that Peterson is always trying to not lose the third personal. And maybe I will include at the end of this video the dregs of an unfinished video that I worked on yesterday and never, just basically abandoned because I didn't like how it was shaping up. Back to the So Pageau is much more disciplined on sticking to the first personal. Peterson can't quite do that because he's a university professor and because he's a scientist. And so the scientific view sticks with the third personal. It sticks with a monarchical vision. And so the dregs of the video that I'm going to post at the end of this video, which has Gavin Ashenden, and I knew, Skip, I was thinking about, I know you left a comment, Skip, on the video before, so if you're watching this, Skip, I knew you were going to react strongly to Gavin Ashenden, because Gavin Ashenden has totally, rejected Jung. And of course, Skip, those of you who know Skip on one of the Jung channels, Skip's a lover of Jung. And so Gavin Ashenden has completely rejected Jung. And so when Gavin Ashenden engages with Jordan Peterson's material, Gavin Ashenden has, left the Anglican Church, rather high status in the Anglican Church, and went to the Roman Catholic Church. And so Gavin Ashenden is Gavin Ashenden. Agree, disagree. He's just out there, but he's an interesting voice. And so I included him in the whole video about the transcendental or about the mystical. Anyway, so Peterson always has to deal with the third personal. And so when Gavin Ashenden is watching Peterson process this stuff in a room full of Cambridge academicians, Gavin Ashenden is feeling the tension here. Pageau basically sticks in on the first personal because he doesn't have to leave it, because his entire theology can fit into it. His reading from Genesis can fit into that. And so Genesis for him is always true because Genesis lays itself out in the world as we see it. Peterson was always flipping between the third personal and the first personal in his biblical series on Genesis, because he is studying psychology, which is always sort of in the middle of the third personal. That psychology is basically attempting to study the first personal from the perspective of the third personal. And we'll have to see if psychology and the other social sciences, how they actually endure with the continual recession of the modern. We don't want to lose the third personal. It has tremendous power and it's given us tremendous benefits. But what we've seen is that the third personal is inadequate. And that's really at the basis for the postmodern crisis. And if you watch Pageau and Bishop Barron's video that they did together, that was posted after the Four Horsemen video, you'll see both of them, which is a position that I've had that said, and this position that Jamie Smith over at Calvin University has maintained, that, and what John Vervaeke is presenting, the postmodernism is also presented an opportunity for some breaking down and recognition of the limitations and the overreach of modernity. Anyway, back to the Substack. The Four Horsemen video opened with a treatment, and John and Jordan Peterson asked each of them to give a treatment of what meaning is about. And actually that little clip that I made of Pageau is from Pageau's, is it? I'm not sure. Anyway, when Pageau is asked to talk about meaning, he goes first personal. And when I wrote this first tweet, I didn't quite have the personal suffix on, which I think makes it a little better. Meaning is an appropriation of the third person to the first person. And actually, so I worked on the video, the dregs of which, or the tailings of which I will attach to the end of this video. So I worked on that video. I was frustrated, and because it's really frustrating to put an hour into a video and realize, this is crap. I don't want to post this. I mean, it's even bad for me, which is a low bar. And then I decided, okay, I'm going to post the deconstruction video because he gave me permission to share that. And I was really anxious to get that video out there because the video I posted today was really a good one. And then my wife is at home and she's dealing with school and COVID, and in terms of all the COVID limitations at school, and it's just wreaking havoc in a setting like a school. And so we have dinner, and then she says, "Oh, why don't I've watched some TV. Why don't you pick what we'll watch?" And so I wanted to see the weather. So I went over to the local news, and there was this interesting story about a standoff up in El Dorado County, which is up near Apple Hill, for those of you who live in the Sacramento area, where there's a standoff and there's some gunfire, and it was near a school. And actually, I couldn't find the teacher's aide, who I thought gave the best interview, because she heard the gunshots. And up there in the foothills, they're a little less spooked by gunfire than those of us who live down here in the middle of the valley in the city. Because if there's gunfire in the city, it's you don't want to have any of that. Up there in the foothills, someone may be hunting and, a little bit more comfortable with guns up there in the foothills. So, but this teacher aide or someone heard some gunfire. And so she stepped outside and said, "I wondered what it meant." And bang. Okay. That's the third personal. She heard gunfire. That's out there. That's the third personal. Gunfire. Bang, bang, bang. Objective, sound. A tree was falling and she heard it. And she asked, what did it mean? She was in charge of a bunch of school children. She was going to have to make decisions about the safety of the school children. Now, again, there was that school shooting in Michigan. And so trust me when I tell you, anytime there's a school shooting in the nation, that grabs teacher salience landscape, because teachers love their students, especially if they have little children like my wife has in her elementary school. And they're concerned about if they're a little higher anxiety. And it's like, honey, the odds of a school shooting at your shoot, blah, 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 blah. It doesn't matter. I'm very low in neuroticism and negative emotion. She's higher than I am. And she's like, every time there's a school shooting, I always think, what would happen if there was a shooter here? How am I going to keep my children safe? So this teacher hears the shooting. What does this mean? Okay. What is meaning? There's something out there in the world, in the third personal, and she immediately has to translate it down into the first personal. That's the meaning move. From the third personal to the first personal. And that's very similar to the transjective. Now, Pageau had also made a video about, I remember him saying at some point, and I couldn't find it, some people say they have photographic memory. My memory is more phonographic. And I think that's true because I'm a little dyslexic. And so when I learned the violin in first grade, I learned in the Suzuki method. So I have a pretty good memory for things that I hear. And that's part of the reason that I do these clip compilations, because I can find things in books fairly easily. Kindle sort of messes that up, except that I can search for words in Kindle. But I can usually sort of remember a video and where in the video something was. And I remember Pageau saying something about, the objective subjective. And that's a lot of what we're sort of working on. And so when you listen to Verveiki and his transjective, that's really what he's getting at. And so I found in the Jonathan Pageau November question and answer a question about the Verveiki transjective.
All right, so Maximus Magyar asks, are objective and subjective useful terms for talking about reality while consciousness plays a role in all manifestation? How about John Verveiki's word transjective? That's fine. I mean, I use the words, I tend to use those words a little subversively because I obviously don't agree. I'll tend to, for example, want to show that the subjective is objective in the way that people think about it kind of in a vulgar way.
And then he goes on to talk about transjective and the fact that sometimes, I mean, if you want to figure out what John Verveiki is doing, here I've got 50 hours of video. Now, I'm not one to talk because I got a few hundred hours of video, and I'm not even bothering to explain myself in a systematic way, so I'm certainly not one to point fingers at this. But again, this is Pageau. It's the first personal. That's where he leads. And he's trying to do a little bit of translating from the third personal. Again, Jordan Peterson in his biblical series was very much switching between the third personal and the first personal. And I think that is really where you have so much of your meaning making. And I think that's true to a lot of what John Verveiki has been saying. And I think it's true to a lot of what Peterson has been saying. But, my thick skull, and now Bishop Barron, which I thought, if you go back to I thought he gave a terrific answer to the meaning question. He went at it through value, which I think is another great way to go at it. But this is, I think, a lot of what we mean when we talk about meaning. Meaning making, or sense making in the Rebel Wisdom language, is taking that third person knowledge, shooter out on the highway, and asking, how do I take third person knowledge, hearing gunfire, and use it to act with respect to the students I love? That's exactly what was on that teacher's mind. The children heard gunshots, are scared. That's sense making that the third person sounds of shots might impact the first person. Potential pain, interruption of the personal narrative progress, our life in a sense, moving forward in time. That's really what our life is in a narrative way, how many of us really process and assume our life to be. It's a personal narrative progress moving forward in time. But as children don't process this very consciously. They just feel scared because we see patterns and we see opportunities and threats. And children, they might hear pop, 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 and they might not recognize, they might not know what that is. Maybe if they've had more experience with gunshots, they know. So, but the teacher is an authority, and the teacher right away, what does this mean? It's exactly what she said on the videotape. And I thought that's exactly the right word. And this is exactly the interchange, the third personal to the first personal. In two conversations between Jonathan Pageau and Rationality Rules and Adam Friended, there was a lot of frustration and meaning making. Pageau confuses and frustrates people, and it's not clear that many people understand why. In fact, I've been listening to him for 4 years, and I'm just starting to figure it out now. But you shouldn't feel embarrassed about taking time to learn this stuff. This stuff is not immediately apparent, and even if we can grasp it in our own skulls, whether we can articulate it in a way that other people will understand, that's the challenge. Perhaps a way to figure out Jonathan Pageau is to see him as approaching the world from the first-person perspective rather than the third person. Ever since the Enlightenment, the third-person perspective is the one that is sanctioned for public life and governance. In many ways, that's what happened first in the Church in the Protestant Reformation. We're not going to listen to the hierarchy. We're not going to listen to what the bishop feels should happen here. Now, a lot of that just sneaks back into Protestantism because you need to have both the third personal and the first personal to live. So the fact that this stuff sort of snuck back into Protestantism through the rear door, I believe in Luther that it's sola scriptura. Well, you're believing in Luther. So again, you never get rid of these dynamics fully. The scientific image is the one privileged for the public world. And again, that in a lot of ways really developed strongly in modernity and became the modern stance. Third person is public, first person is private. Now again, look at Jordan Peterson. He's deeply modernist, but he's just there on the cusp. In many ways, Pageau is over the hill and can comfortably go over the hill because he's a YouTuber and an icon carver, and it's like, he doesn't have to be a scientist. Peterson has to deal with scientists, and so he has to deal with the third personal. Now in the recession of modernity, Pageau reprioritizes, and again, this is a function of priority, the first person perspective that is most clear in his exegesis of Genesis 1 on Jordan Peterson's posting. Every time Pageau says the world lays itself out, he's invoking the first person perspective. That's really what he's doing. I remember Mary Cohen picked up on that right away, and she said, every time he says lays itself out, and, I'd heard that, 2-3 years ago, and it still hasn't gotten through my thick skull. Now, again, you might say, Paul's being hard on himself. Do not worry about me being hard on myself. My wife will tell you, I have an ego the size of Texas. I doesn't, every now and then I'll think, I'm just not smart enough to manage this stuff. The slow pace of my cognition and my learning is to your benefit, because if I can think slowly and work things out and discover language, I can share it with you. So high status and astronomical IQs are not necessarily something to aspire towards. So anyway, it takes me a while to figure this stuff out, but hopefully by the time I do, I have some language and some ability to share it with you. And again, for my tremendously rambly long videos, that's part of the process. And hopefully after doing it a few years, I will have better, succinct, communicable language to share and to refine with you all. Of John Vervaeke's 4 P's of knowing, the propositional is third person, but the participatory and procedural and perspectival are more first personal. See, right there, this is part of the reason I like sort of thinking in real time, because someone might say, Paul, when did you develop the first personal, third personal language? I say, I did it somewhere around 2:20 a.m. on December 8, and I did it right there in the middle of that tweet. Knowing the propositional is third person, but the participatory, procedural, and perspectival are more first personal. And bang, there's a little bit of insight and a little tiny paradigm shift in my little noggin. Well, it's not that little as far as noggins go. Meaning making is the transjective frame switching between the third personal and the first personal. Third personal applied to the first personal, leading to the first personal knowing and acting. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. That's really where meaning happens. And this maps, a monarchical vision, and then again the personal, just back and forth, back and forth. That's how we live. So, all right, I did pretty well on time here. I think, well, it gives me a little bit of time to include the what's coming now in this video. Feel free to skip, because what it is pieces of a video that I abandoned yesterday. But it might be interesting to you because you can see I'm working through the language there. And I didn't really have it. And it took, this is all insight. And it's like, the shamanic thing where things are disrupted. So I abandoned the video and I went home and I'm watching this random news question. And this teacher comes out and says, I heard shots and I had to, what does this mean? Bang. And I had a usable definition of meaning. And I had a usable way to talk about Jonathan Pageau. And I had a usable way to talk about the difference between Jonathan Pageau and Jordan Peterson. And I had a better picture for sort of the difference between Peterson and Verveiki in terms of a whole bunch of things. So, yeah, this ends the intentional portion of this video. And what follows are the scraps of a video that I would have posted today, but I abandoned. And so I know how y'all are. YouTube shows me the analytics. Very few of you make it to the end. And so if you're one of those who makes it to the end, hats off to you. I don't make it to the end of every video, by no means. So, okay, this is the end of the better formed video. This is the Substack. If you want a link to the Substack, it's down below. If you want to get these Substacks in your inbox, subscribe to the Substack. It just takes an email address. One of the things I like about Substack is that there aren't any ads. I do have a WordPress blog that I use that doesn't have ads either, but that's much more a filing cabinet. This is sort of a way to get, I can only listen to one Paul video, PVK video a month, but I'm kind of curious about what he's working on and developing. Obviously, you can follow me on Twitter for that, but I do a lot more playing on Twitter with all kinds of other things too. But the Substack will give you a better sense of just little snapshots of what I'm doing if you're not the kind that has a job where you have to be in a car or work a trade or code or something like that. So, okay, this is the end of the other part of the video. The rest of this video are all the stuff that I abandoned but didn't delete. So, thanks for watching. Okay, I changed my mind. I'm going to have two versions of this video. If you're watching this one, you're watching the shorter version, and that will post at 6 a.m. Pacific when I usually post my videos. The longer version I'll post at maybe 7, and it will have not only the part that you've just watched, but all the rest of the stuff. So that way, those of you who want a short video can have a short video. Those of you who want a long video, you get a long video. Okay, thanks for watching. Leave a comment.